Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another edition of Flashpoint, a television program of issues and ideas. Flashpoint is brought to you by the Lawrence Debate Union, an endowed co-curricular activity at the University of Vermont that trains UVM students in the arts and skills of debating and then has them compete locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. And also, the Lawrence Debate Union does a number of things to increase discussion, discourse, dialogue, and debate, all beginning with the letter D, here in our community, and Flashpoint is one of those things that we do. You can watch Flashpoint on Burlington Channel 15, thanks to Vermont Community Access Media for making Flashpoint possible through all these years. But wait, it's also available online for on-demand viewing. Go to our website, debate.uvm.edu, click on the Flashpoint icon, and you will go to dozens and dozens of potential Flashpoint episodes that you can watch whenever you want. You can now also download the podcast versions and watch them on your Apple TV if you happen to have one. But otherwise, we're here live and for free. My name is Alfred C. Snider. I'm the Edwin W. Lawrence Professor of Forensics at the University of Vermont, and I'll be your facilitator for this hopefully peaceful discussion today. I want to welcome our panelists for today's show, and I want to welcome on my far right, geographically, but not necessarily politically, Justin Morgan Parmett. Justin, you are a graduate of our program. You were a coach for 4 years, winning several national titles as a coach, and now you're doing something else even more important and more interesting. Why don't you tell us?
Sure. I work for Spectrum Youth and Family Services now. I work for the Domestic Abuse Education Project, and I coordinate a youth anti-violence education program called Project Safe Choices. It's been a few years since I've been on Flashpoint, and I'm glad to be back.
All right, you were on the 300 show, for example.
I was, yeah.
Okay, now is this a statewide program?
This is a statewide program.
Great.
Yep.
Excellent.
We work with community members and the Department of Corrections throughout the state.
Okay. On my immediate right, we have the current dean of Flashpoint panelists, Sam Ricker. Sam, what have you done to your head?
I don't know, but I did it for the ladies.
Oh, okay. You got a pretty significant haircut, so if regular viewers say that, we've never seen you before, tell us a little about your Halloween outfit.
My Halloween outfit was a Canadian superhero. I was a super mountie, complete with red spandex and whole Canadian attire, and yeah, it was quite something.
All right, great. Well, we can hear about it, but not have to see it. On my far left, we have Nicole Colston, who is a new arrival here in Vermont. Well, not necessarily, you're familiar with Vermont, but new to our program. Nicole has joined our coaching staff this year. She's teaching at the University of Vermont and coaching. You come to us by way of Appalachian State University and the University of Miami. And how's it feel to be living in Vermont?
It's awesome. I'm loving it. Good to go.
Good. Well, we're very glad to have you. Students seem to like you, and I like you too.
I like you too.
That's pretty cool. We won't go any farther than that. It'll be a little cheesy. On my immediate left, I have Sam Natale, who's a first-year student at the University of Vermont, and Sam's getting ready to experience his first Vermont winter since you come from Florida. What are your coping plans for that?
My coping plans include learning to make fire in my dorm, trying to disable the smoke alarm to allow that to happen, and possibly buying a camel and you know that trick in Star Wars.
Oh, where you slice them open and sleep inside the camel.
That's my game plan.
Okay, well, I hope PETA doesn't hear about that. Okay, watch out with that fire alarm stuff. We had a former debater kicked out of school for a semester for doing that, so I would urge you not to do that. I suggest coats and blankets and things might help you instead, but that's what friends are for. Well, fellow citizens, we have come to an important point in time. Yes, show number 352. As we march inexorably onward towards 400, this show is particularly important. Domestic violence is our topic. we are in the beginning of November now, and October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but frankly, we think that every month should be Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So that's the topic of our show. We're going to talk about the extent, some of the manifestations of domestic violence, some myths, some things we do know about it, and talk about how people can get help and assistance if they need it. And then at the end, we might even make some predictions. So here we go. I was asking before the program, do we know any statistics about the extent of domestic violence? And Justin, we're really lucky to have you here because you're a professional now at dealing with this problem. That means you get paid, not that you know everything.
Yeah.
And are there some local figures about whether that's a problem here in the area, or?
Yeah, there are. To give you some idea of the extent, in Chittenden County alone, last year, Women Helping Battered Women, which is the local advocacy agency protecting women who are and men who are victims and survivors of domestic violence, served approximately 2,300 adults in 1 year. And that's a pretty alarming rate for the size of our county. I mean, it is the largest county in Vermont, but certainly 2,300 adults approximately in 1 year coming to one agency for service.
And that's almost 1%.
Yeah.
Of the population of Chittenden County. That's an incredible.
So if you think, you know, 1 out of every 100, there's statistics that say about 1 out of every 4 women will be a victim of either domestic or sexual violence at some point in their life in the United States. That is 25%, yeah. And that's an alarming number. Huge. So it affects, you know, it really is something that affects all of us, whether we've experienced it or not.
Right, and those are just people who are involved, and of course there are partners, there are children, there are friends, there are extended family, so it reaches out pretty far. What do we know about the extent to which domestic violence is underreported?
You know, underreporting is always something that's almost impossible to know for sure, but we would imagine that for every 1 person that reports it, there's at least 3 or 4, if not, you know, significantly more than that out there that are not reporting it. And there's a number of reasons why people don't report domestic violence cases. So.
Well, there are some things that we know about domestic violence and things that we don't know. What are some of the things that we do know?
Some of the things we do know. We know that domestic violence is a choice that batterers make to have power and control over their partner in an intimate relationship. It's oftentimes a very conscious choice. They're very aware of what they're doing, and they have very strategic purposes for those actions.
And what would some of those strategic purposes be?
Well, usually it's a force. It's a coercive force, and the strategic purpose may be simple things to get out, to take out just kind of brute violence, or to demean the woman in front of the children in order to gain sway with them. There can be a wide range of purposes, ranging from you know, control to just pure expression of violence and unpleasantness.
To what extent is this a part of the male role? I mean, you talked about Women Helping Battered Women serves women and men who are victims of it, but it seems to be predominantly women are victims and survivors of these. Does it have something to do with what it means to be a man in our society?
It does, for the most part. It feeds off the notion that, you know, we're in a male-dominated society and men are, you know, sometimes valued more than women, and people raised with that notion that's ingrained in their mind will assert that in, you know, any way they can. So
I think that sexist societal structures help men enact that control. Like, I don't think we're likely to follow familial roles or gender roles that are societally described, and then they can use those to manipulate.
I think also the way that we kind of understand, conceptualize the institution of marriage is a part of it, in that it's not just the subordination of somebody who's weaker, but it's a specific relationship that I think does kind of go back to the idea of a wife as a piece of property. And even if we don't like to acknowledge that, I think that mentality still exists.
Definitely. And just to go back to what Nicole was saying, I think it's really important to, your question, is it related to what it means to be a man? And if we look around in the media, in television, in movies, in advertising, in video games, in almost every aspect of our popular culture, what it means to be a man is to be aggressive, to be tough, to be violent, to not back down. That leads to a lot of violence between men, but it easily translates into why men feel a need to have that power and control. And when a woman, maybe resists that, he feels as though he has no other choice but to, maintain that power, use violence or other intimidating means to keep that control. So it's very much linked to what it means to be a man in our society.
I mean, some people would say that men who use coercion and violence in this way just don't know any better. But what I hear you saying is that it's a conscious choice, just like a negotiating strategy or the strategy you use when asking your boss for a raise or trying to talk a policeman or a police person out of giving you a ticket. Is that what you're saying? It's not that they don't have a different way, it's just that this way works.
Probably equally, if not more deliberate than trying to talk your way out of a ticket. It takes a lot of thought, and I think, I don't know, speaking to that question is this idea that it takes sort of time in an abusive relationship to develop lots of times, and so the manipulation is going on maybe even before you're recognizing the levels of violence or that things are wrong, and the knowledge of, it's like, I feel like abusers are looking for clues, like sort of feeding off of people's weaknesses, and it's very manipulative and very deliberate, very deliberate.
To what extent also, if I may ask everyone's opinion here, is it a learned behavior? The conventional wisdom says, oh, well, it's just because he was abused and that it's handed down like that, but we know that it's a rational choice. So to what degree is it a learned behavior from culture or family, and to what degree is it a choice?
Yeah, that's a great question and an interesting point. I mean, we know that about 50 to 70% of young boys who grow up watching their father, battering, end up becoming batterers. Now, again, it's all part of that, societal piece that it is really influencing us from all directions. It always is a conscious choice that they make, although that choice may be influenced by their surroundings, for sure. But it's, when talking about it as a choice, it's important to distinguish that between the notion of, I just lost it, I wasn't thinking, I just snapped. And men who batter do not just snap. They like Nicole said, progressively become more manipulative, more controlling, until eventually they feel or think that they know that violence is something they can do and get away with and use as a means to control someone. So in a sense, it's a learned behavior, and the most important thing about that is that if it is a learned behavior, it can be unlearned or relearned. It's not an innate behavior, and it's important to recognize that. Although violence is all around us in connection to masculinity, that is not a natural thing. It's not that it's because men have testosterone that they become violent. And so,
I mean, I've in studying the evidence about how violence in the media and violence in video games and stuff, can have a relationship, but it's not strongly causal that we're all violent because of this. But I think that feeds on then what you see in your home, right? When you grow up, Dad did this, he got what he wanted, I'm not getting everything I want, so maybe I should try to do this, or engage in some of these coercive behaviors. That really reinforces it in ways in which media and video games can't.
Yep, and I would also add peer cultures to that, because there's a lot of young men who grow up with very healthy parenting styles, and their parents are quite equal, but then get themselves involved in peer cultures that really support this dominant notion of masculinity, power and control over girlfriends at a young age, and kids can pick it up that way as well.
You mentioned power and control. Also, to what extent is it not just violence, or is there kind of a continuum of controlling behaviors that could be considered abusive?
I was thinking something similar to that, which is that like maybe lots of times in our family lives, if abuse isn't recognized as that, and it's a very deliberate effort to ignore the problem and not say that it's abuse. And so I think there are lots of behaviors that before getting hit that are qualify as abuse and often go unrecognized. So it's like a learned behavior. I don't even know sometimes if it's conscious for people, like, oh, my dad hits to get what he wants, I would hit to get what I want, but rather that like those relationships aren't even identified in sometimes people's minds as being abuse.
Yeah, and some of those behaviors, just to give you an example, I mean, there's such a wide range of different behaviors, whether it be controlling the finances, and not allowing their partner to be able to have access to the finances, or controlling when the phone gets turned off and things like that. A number of isolating maneuvers. There's a number of ways that partners can threaten or intimidate to try and maintain control. There's a lot of ways in which the children get used to manipulate control. Threats of I'll file for custody, I'll take your children away, you'll have nowhere to go. A lot of emotional abuse, degrading people, making them feel as if they're worthless, they're crazy, it's all their fault, no one will believe them, no one will support them. A lot of name calling, there's so many different behaviors that won't get someone arrested. Right? You can do them and it's legal according to the law. It's not going to get you charged with domestic abuse, but it's all part of that process of living with a batterer that sometimes a lot of women that have experienced that will say is almost worse than the physical abuse, which eventually heals.
Well, and it's not like every time, it's not the kind of manipulative behavior that every time you want something and you're not getting it, you start hitting people. There's this, you raise your voice, or threaten, or slam something down, or indicate that you're close to violence. And if people know that you are capable of it, then it's like, okay. It's almost like saber rattling. Yeah. Saying that don't push me, kind of thing.
And in fact, most men who batter don't start with the physical violence in every incident. They have a ratcheting up process before they'll, to try and, it's all about entitlement. I deserve what I want when I want it, and they'll do a number of different things to try and get that at any given time.
Well, if a woman is in this situation where it's escalating and they're kind of being systematically isolated and cut off, to what extent does she have an ability to do something about it, or is she stuck in place? Why is it that women don't act sooner before actual domestic violence?
I would hasten to say that they're not acting. Oftentimes women stay in abusive relationships for a number of reasons, and the appearance from the outside is that you're not doing anything about it, you don't want to get out of it, you must like it to be in that situation or whatnot. But oftentimes
it really takes a lot of energy. If you think about trying to manage a life and also have like a constant barragement of negative things going on in your life, it's a crazy up and down cycle. And so I think this impression that someone isn't doing anything about it is really, really wrong. Like they're probably really doing a lot to hide it, to change it, to think about it. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's almost like a sort of a sinking sort of feeling.
Yeah,
like I'm trying really, really hard to climb out and I can't. So.
And sometimes staying is the best choice in terms of the safety for her and the safety for her children. The majority of women that are murdered in intimate relationships are murdered as they are trying to leave that relationship. And so there's a big fear and safety factor that must be taken into account. Oftentimes we can't understand why would that woman want to leave, wouldn't she want to leave? And in fact, her choices to stay could be the safest thing at that moment. It might not be the right time. She might not have the support network to leave. She might not know that her batterer will be held accountable and will be arrested or charged.
I think the use of this statistic that you were just talking about, the one where most women who are murdered by their abusers are murdered when they try to leave, is a really scary one.
Yeah.
Really
And I
scary
think
one.
that domestic abuse agencies should be very careful about how they deal with using that statistic. I find it limiting. Like,
Yeah, because
very
it's sort of,
scary.
I mean, if you tell abused women that, they're like, holy cow,
Right.
Yeah.
right? I can't.
Well, and
Especially if it's a real fear,
Yeah.
which it probably is.
Yeah.
Probably is, and it just speaks to the need to have an educated police department, an educated state's attorney's office, a
Okay.
good batterers intervention program, a good
Yeah.
advocacy agency.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you because Women Helping Battered Women had their conference and they awarded a couple of special awards, one to the state's attorney's office for their attention to this issue, and one to the city, and specifically the Burlington Police, for their attention. And Justin, I want to ask you, is that because Vermont's really got it together in this, or because other people don't? So there's the comparison.
Well, I would say Burlington or Chittenden County has it more together. I mean, Vermont is not all on board with the same, ideas. You go into different counties in Vermont, and there's very different perceptions. I think Chittenden County has a new state's attorney, T.J. Donovan, who's been great and very supportive. The police department has, been trying to train themselves and make it a priority. So I'd say Burlington, Chittenden County in general really is, also probably because of a lot of major incidences that have happened recently, making it, a priority, whereas maybe other counties.
And I know it's also an issue down in Addison County where one of our alums is now the state's attorney, Erica Marthage. So, and she campaigned on that issue and unseated a longtime Republican in that role. Justin, you've brought us a fascinating list of myths about, well, fascinating that they're thought-provoking, about domestic and dating violence, and I just wanted to go through a couple of them because looking through them, I saw some that I went, oh yeah, I thought that was true. Like substance abuse causes violence.
Yeah, that's a big one because a lot of people that get, charged with domestic assault also have substance abuse issues. But if you think about it, there's probably a lot of people that that drink alcohol and are not abusers, are not violent. So alcohol doesn't make you violent. What we usually tell people is it's about the beliefs that you have about violence and also the beliefs that you have about substance abuse. A lot of people believe I get to be violent when I'm drunk.
Yeah.
That will help make you violent when you're drunk. If you come in and you have an alcohol or drug problem, you need substance abuse counseling. You also need to go through a batterer's intervention program to address your beliefs about women and your beliefs about violence.
Okay, here's one. If my partner were to hit me, I'd be out the door in a minute, indicating that if she stays, she must like it and put up with it.
Yeah, and I think we kind of spoke to that one. There are a number of reasons why women stay, and it might be hard to understand, but the most important thing is to support a woman in her choice, her choices, even if you can't understand.
Batterers are crazy or mentally ill.
Again, I think we kind of spoke to that one. They're making conscious choices. They are not psychopaths. They don't have a mental illness. They make it through, work, through relationships with their male peers and a number of other avenues. They are seen as respectful citizens. A number of people aren't believe that that man could possibly be a batterer because they say, oh, I know him. He's such a nice guy. He wouldn't hurt a fly. Well, when, doors are closed in his house, things are different.
And that can be confusing. Like, right, if someone you are with or you're in a relationship with an abuser, other people perceive them in godlike fashion, right? And all of the sort of you do things wrong, you the blaming suddenly maybe becomes more real of the person. So yeah.
And then when you do speak up, they go, no,
He couldn't possibly.
he couldn't possibly do that.
Yeah.
Whereas we're saying here it's a semi-rational way to get what you want. Okay, well there are a lot of these myths here, but domestic violence is not just physical violence. I think we talked about that. Domestic violence is an issue for women to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this one's interesting. There are actually I've encountered lots of men who have been sort of considered themselves to be victims of abuse, like hit with objects by their girlfriends, things kicked out of the room, clearly mental and verbal abuse. And I don't know, even I feel uncomfortable talking about it. Like, I even just phrased it as they consider themselves as being abused instead of just saying they're abused. I think it's so hard for men to talk about that. And I think female violence on men creates violent men too, and I think that that's an important dynamic of abuse to consider too.
Yeah, I think one other thing to think about in that respect is that for decades it's been women at the forefront of this issue, and while it's women at the forefront of addressing this issue, for the most part it's men at the forefront of committing this violence. And so unless we speak of it as men have to be accountable and stop the violence, women can protect themselves forever, but if men keep beating up women, then it's not going to stop.
Justin, I wanted you to take some time to share some phone numbers and information about people who may be watching, who have questions, and want to know what they can do.
Yeah, let me just take a minute, because when we start to talk about the issue, it really brings up emotions for a lot of people, and there might be someone who didn't realize they could, use someone to talk to. So there's a couple of, if you feel as if you are a victim or are concerned about someone who may be a victim or survivor of domestic violence, Women Helping Battered Women has a 24-hour hotline. The phone number is 802-658-1996. You can also access their website at whbw.org. And then if you know of men who are abusive and who could need some education around domestic violence and around men's violence in general, you can contact the Domestic Abuse Education Project at spectrumvt.org or at 864-7423, extension 335, and that will connect you right to me, and I can get you any help that you would like.
Okay, great. We're running out of time. We have about a minute left, and so I want to ask the panels, do you think in the next 15 to 20 years this situation is going to get better, worse, or stay the same? And let's start with you. Thanks for coming on the program, Justin.
My pleasure. I hope that it gets better. I feel as if we can continue the educational path we're going on, where men take responsibility and are held accountable for their actions. We can start to change the culture of violence that we live in.
Sam Ricker.
I think Justin's absolutely right. One would hope it would get better, but the notion that we're going to change all these structural concepts within society and redo people's mentality about what it means to be a male and what it means to be violent, will take a lot longer. So,
Nicole, Colston.
I'm optimistic. I see changes in gender roles and the way we do things in society progressively every day, and I think it's a complex problem, and I think the more that we explore with each other and talk about these issues, the better off we'll be. I know I'm optimistic.
Sam Natale.
I think that just with women couples getting married later in life, being able to have more financial independence, being able to have more support and more talking about it, it's just a statistical factor of how this pattern is on the downfall. So I think it will get better in the next 20 years.
On this one, I'm going to be optimistic. I think there's hope. It'll be slow, but we have to work on male privilege as the critical way to handle it. Thanks a lot for watching this week's edition of Flashpoint. Thanks to all our panelists. And don't forget, think for yourself.